welcome to our W Factor interview series. Thank you for taking the time to be with us today.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's really great to have this opportunity.
Great. Let's start. Could you tell us more about yourself, your background, and your professional achievements?
I'm a lawyer by background. I was a lawyer for nearly 30 years and a partner in a law firm for 20. And I've just recently moved into my new role at the Australian Energy Market Commission just about 2.5 years ago now. So in one way, that was a big career change. In another way, not so much, because my legal practice had always been focused in the energy sector and involved helping governments and regulators with reform projects, also helping developers with wind and solar projects, and also helping other industry participants with advisory work and compliance with regulatory regimes. So I had a lot of content knowledge to bring with me, and it's been really great to step into this new role where I get to not just advise on the current law, but also help develop what I think the law should be at such an exciting time in the development of the sector. From a personal perspective, I'm married, I have 2 teenage children, and so that obviously keeps me pretty busy trying to juggle a really busy and fascinating and challenging job with my family as well.
Okay, that's very interesting, Anna. Thank you very much. We are now moving to the second question, if you like, which would be, in your opinion, what is the current state of gender representation in the Australian energy sector?
So in the Australian energy sector, which is probably fairly typical of internationally, we have reasonably good overall representation in renewable energy. So this is quite interesting. So the statistics for renewable energy is around the high 30% gender representation. In the energy sector overall, it's not as good. It dips to somewhere in the low 20s. And then the other challenge that we have is if you look in different pockets, there's really different representation. So in the space where I work, in the regulatory space, we do pretty well. So we have women chairs of both my organisation and our colleagues at the Australian Energy Regulator, for example. But if you get into some areas like the CEOs of the businesses, it's really poor. So when I first started in this role and I was having meetings with roundtables of CEOs, I was quite shocked actually to see how few women CEOs there are in the sector. Another area where there's very poor representation is in the engineering space or in the trades, for example. So earlier this year, I participated in a symposium and learned that there are only 3% of electricians are women. So there's these real discrepancies in some important parts of the sector. And then if you look at our gender pay gap, that persists in the energy sector. The most recent statistics that came out last month show that there's still a 9.4% gender pay gap for the sector that encompasses the energy sector. So in some ways, we've done some good work and made some good strides, but there are obviously still some areas for real focus and where there's a long way to go.
Okay, you're right. Yeah, it's probably very representative of the global trends. So next question now. What specific instruments or strategies do you believe are crucial in promoting gender equality and leveling the playing field?
So I tend to think of issues that we need to face in terms of addressing gender equality in 3 categories. And then there's different things that you would use to address each of those categories. So my first one is around basic safety, hygiene, frankly. So there should be zero tolerance of harassment, zero tolerance of active discrimination. And then you can get into sort of the more enhanced safety where you're looking at psychological safety at work and really good inclusive practices. My second area is what I think of as structural issues. So the fact that in our society, women are still predominantly the caregivers, and of course, we're still the ones who have the children. And so thinking about how those issues impact on women's career opportunities and career progression, and having policies that address that area. And then my third area is in the concepts around unconscious bias and merit and how they impact women as well. So as I said, different strategies to address each of those. So maybe going backwards through them, if I think about unconscious bias, which can really impact things like recruitment and career progression and remuneration, things that are successful, for example, are things that try and, first of all, recognise that unconscious bias is a thing and not necessarily negative. We all have it, but realising that it's there and then deliberately doing something about it. So, for example, looking at CVs that have been redacted so you don't have the background information about the person, you're just looking at the achievements. Or in ensuring that when you're advertising positions, you have a certain number of women, a requirement that you have women on the list, so that you're at least ensuring that you're casting a wide net and thinking broadly about what the skills are that could fulfill a particular role, not just always defaulting to what's always been done. I think also doing some reverse calibration. So, for example, when you do an annual performance review and assign remuneration outcomes, considering that with a gender lens and seeing is that telling you anything interesting about what your unconscious bias might be revealing. Then looking at those structural issues, I think there's some really critical and well-known things that can be done around ensuring that you have a flexibility policy, so it enables people to work different hours for a role or work from home at some points, which we've all become very good at during COVID. Making sure you have good parental leave policies. So one that we introduced recently at the Commission was to ensure that all people taking parental leave were able to be paid their superannuation even during the unpaid portion of that leave. And an interesting thing about these type of policies is I actually think it's good that they are gender neutral, because in that case we start to normalise people having different parts of their career and different ways in which they intersect their family or caring responsibilities with their career. And then going back to the first one around safety, I think that one thing we're starting to see is an expectation that if you observe behaviour such as harassment or discrimination, sometimes people don't know what to do. They feel uncomfortable and they think perhaps it's not right to report it. It should be left with the person who's been the subject of that behaviour to decide how they feel about it. But shifting to an expectation that no, we do think that that's part of everybody's responsibility to report that behaviour so that people know where they stand. And then you really need to talk the talk and walk the walk. It's no good just having a policy that says we don't accept this behaviour if it's not apparent that when that behaviour occurs, there's a consequence for it and you really do follow through on that. So there's a real broad spectrum of things that can be done. And I do think starting with what is the particular issue that might be impacting your own organisation and picking a particular policy to address to go with that, and then continuing to work through so that you're always trying to improve those outcomes.
That's really great. Thanks, Anna. Well, and you already mentioned a few of them, but could you share with us some examples of best practices and significant contributions, maybe by other female professionals in the energy, climate and sustainability fields in Australia?
So I had a hard time thinking about the answer to this question, actually, because there's so many wonderful contributions that women are making across the sector. So I've picked 3 women to talk about, just to give, I guess, an example of that breadth of contribution, and women who are at different stages involved in different parts of the sector. So the first one is a woman by the name of Anna Collyer, who is the CEO of an organisation called Climate Works, and in fact has been the CEO since they were founded in 2009. She was also one of the founding directors of an institution called the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, which was, as you can see, each of them has been established to support the energy transition. And Anna's leadership, particularly through Climate Works, in a period where Australia has been, really challenged by climate policy, and our politics has been very controversial, and there's been a lot of changing each time we change federal government. Many prime ministers have lost their jobs, in effect, over climate policy. Her organisation has been very steadfast in continuing to develop really well thought out, detailed research, presenting very high quality information and engaging in advocacy in a very consistent and sophisticated way. That's meant that it's continued to remain on the agenda to the point that we're now finally in a place where we have a consistent approach across all of our governments to be aiming for net zero by 2050, and in fact accelerating that. And I think a lot of the good work that that organisation has done over many years under her leadership's been a really important part. When we finally got the politics ready, we had all of the information and actions well sort of thought through and understood. Second woman I'm going to speak about is someone who's at a much earlier stage in her career, but was in fact someone who worked with me when I was at the law firm. So she started life as a lawyer as well, but has recently moved through a couple of different roles and is the founder of a new tech startup, which is looking at carbon accounting. So developing software to help companies understand their own emissions in a much more granular and detailed way. In the words of their company, it's really to make it as concrete as how you would do your financial accounting. And so this startup is currently building their client base and building their funding and getting some real attention from funders in terms of just being a very practical, real way of supporting companies who are trying to achieve their own climate objectives and therefore contribute to our overall climate ambitions. And then the third woman is that woman's name is Jessica Richmond. The third one I thought I would mention is a woman by the name of Rachel Watson, who again was involved in the clean energy sector through being the CEO at one of the developers, so a company called Pacific Hydro. She was the Australian CEO. So worked on developing renewable energy projects right across Australia, but then also took an additional leadership role as the chair of the Clean Energy Council, which is one of our peak lobby groups to promote renewable energy issues within Australia. And again, was doing that during a time when it was quite challenging because of the politics to be promoting and supporting renewable energy. So they're just three different examples of some really wonderful leadership that we have by women in the sector promoting renewables and promoting our transition to net zero.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. Must have been super hard for you to choose just three people. Very nice also to see that they are already in fairly high-level positions, maybe CEOs or alike. Very inspiring, what can I say? Thank you so much, Anna. Moving to the next question, we would like to hear more about you, your own experience. So what are the challenges that you have encountered in your career and how have you overcome them?
So I think that I've been actually very lucky in the way that my career has evolved in the energy sector. And then I think there's also been certainly challenges along the way. So I'll talk about both. One of the sort of pieces of good fortune I had when I came into the sector, and at this stage I was a young lawyer, is it was at an early stage of development of the deregulation of the sector. So the taking it out of the public ownership, we were disaggregating the state-owned vertically integrated monopolies, introducing a market, introducing competition, and then privatising some of the parts of the sector. And because I was in at the start, if you like, it meant I always had a lot of confidence that I knew as much as anybody else knew. So in some of the other areas of law where I practiced in the early stages, I felt often at a disadvantage to a more senior person who might be on the other side of a negotiation, because I was worried that, they'd been involved for longer, they knew more than what I was able to learn in the period of time I'd been practicing. But I never felt like that in the energy sector because I was kind of, as I said, there at the ground floor. And so it gave me this kind of real head start from a confidence perspective. The second area where I've been really fortunate is that my husband, when we had our children, we decided between us that he actually preferred to stay at home and be a full-time caregiver for our children. And so that gave me a lot of flexibility with my work and many things that I know is a huge part of what women have to grapple with in their career of navigating childcare and career progression. I was quite fortunate to have him supporting me in this way, so I was able to still pursue my career in a way that gave me the balance of being able to have a family but not necessarily have all the challenging issues that women most often have to deal with. On the other hand, it was interesting that even though I had this advantage of having my husband James at home, I still found at that point in my career where I was becoming more senior that it was difficult to feel like I was accepted within the circles that I was starting to mix in. So starting to build, in that case, my own client base within the energy sector and gain the confidence of clients, and having to learn how to both be myself, which is an issue I think we'll come back to a little bit later, but also work out how to get the best way of being myself, if you like, in order to be able to continue to progress and do my work and get the best outcome from what I was seeking to do in my career was a really interesting challenge. And one of the things that I learned and was suggested to me by, again, I was very lucky the firm that I was at the time had a diversity and inclusion advisor who would work with some of the women partners to help us navigating some of these challenges. And she said, well, you really need a mentor. Is there someone in the firm who you think, you would like to mentor you from the senior partners? And I was like, oh, well, that would be great. But, the person I had in mind is, they're head of a department. They're very busy. And she said, why don't you just ask? Because you never know. And so that was a real learning, is to progress. It's really important to be able to ask for help. And actually, people are usually pretty happy to give it. So this particular person who I approached to be a mentor was delighted to help me and to work with me. And that made a huge difference to me being able to take the next step in my career. I had a similar experience at around the same time where the firm was asking who was interested in doing sort of advanced leadership training. And although at the time I felt like I was quite under the radar, I was really interested in leadership. And so again, I sort of took myself out of my comfort zone to put my hand up and say, actually, I'd really like to do that. So I think some of the challenges we can certainly come from the external environment, but also we can place on ourselves. And it's important that we also take responsibility for what we can do about facing into those challenges. And for me, a couple of them were around being prepared to ask for help and being prepared to put myself out of my comfort zone.
Yeah, definitely. Very important. As you said, stepping out of your comfort zone and asking for help, and also the importance of mentoring. Thank you, Anna, for reminding us of all these important elements. And very much linked to this, what advice would you give to young women aspiring to pursue careers in the energy sector?
So the first thing I would say is, it's such a great time to be in the energy sector. Like, there's such a huge opportunity, which is what's, really driven my career change at this point in time, to step into the challenge of addressing climate change and how we can navigate our way forward. And I see that the opportunity for women comes in multiple different ways. So there's the trying to advance women participation in those areas of the sector that are more traditionally not dominated by men. So we talked a little earlier about engineering and electricians, for example. Well, we just need more and more of those people. So if we can get more women involved, then that will help us achieve what we're seeking to achieve. But we also need this really broad variety of skills, because if we think about some of the challenges that we are facing into. And so one of the things that we're seeing in Australia, for example, is the way in which households are participating in the energy sector through putting solar PV on their rooftops, and what the possibilities are when we start really moving into electric vehicles. Like, I think there's a lot of areas where women's sort of what you might regard more traditional skills will be really critical about understanding how to work with households or small business and create new services, for example. And then my third area of sort of opportunity is just the complex problem solving, and the way in which having diverse groups of people tackling problems actually really, there's so much evidence to show that you're more likely to get a good outcome. So that's my first message for women in the energy sector, is it's a really amazing time to be in the sector, and there's so many different ways in which women can contribute. And then thinking about, I guess, going back to some of the learnings from my own career progression, and what I think the ways in which you might want to think about your career are is that the first thing is, doing something that you really love. Like that's sort of an answer in itself. And, to be honest, that's not just about women. I'm having the same conversation with my teenage son who's in his last year of high school and trying to really say, just pick the thing that you want to do that you love, not the thing that you think you should do. And then those two ideas about when you're in that place, then you've got the best opportunity to do well, but thinking about being prepared to ask for help, because we all do need help at different points of time. And I have found, as I said, amazing how prepared people are to help you with your career development. And then taking advantage of opportunities. In fact, I heard another person speaking earlier today, which had a very similar message, is sometimes the opportunity that's presented, like you don't know exactly where it's going to lead. And you may not feel confident yourself that you're up to stepping into what's being offered. But if the person's offering it to you, then they certainly think you are. And then you just never know. And so taking advantage of these opportunities that you may come across in your career will always help you expand your horizons. And some of them may lead to kind of the next great thing that you want to be involved in, and some of them might be more of what we call a learning experience. But I think putting yourself out of your comfort zone and taking advantage of those opportunities is always a positive.
Okay, great. So now, could you tell us more about the Equality in Energy Transition initiative and what's your role in it?
Sure. So this is an initiative established by the International Energy Agency and the Clean Energy Ministerial, seeking to promote gender equality within the sector. It's got 5 programs involved, and the first one is the Ambassador Program. So I'm one of Australia's inaugural ambassadors, and our role is described at a high level as being a role model, promoting the initiative itself, and sort of taking advantage, for example, of speaking opportunities or opportunities like this to really seek to advance women within the sector. The other programs, which all work in together really, is first of all the Equal by 30 campaign, which is seeking to get equal gender representation within the renewable energy sector by 2030. And that's something which, for example, companies can sign up to. So my organisation, the Australian Energy Market Commission, will be signing up to that and pledging actions that will be taken within our own company to ensure that we're achieving the equality objectives that are set. And then there's companion programs around awards, which seek to promote and inspire women, around knowledge sharing, so gathering data so that we have a better understanding of the way in which women are participating, and something to measure progress against, and then also one around communications so that we're able to be promoting and pursuing these initiatives. So that's the program, and I'm really delighted to be involved in it, and it's, as I said, great to have this opportunity to exercise my role as an ambassador.
So final question now for you, Anna, a very important one to us. What's the key to your success? What is the W factor that you bring in your relationship with your coworkers, that you apply in your daily work, and what gave you the strength to achieve it? Have there been any women who have inspired you in your development path, at professional or personal level?
And this is also a hard question to answer about yourself. So I think what I wanted to talk about was this idea that I raised earlier about, being yourself and leaning into your own strengths. And so when I think about the way I go about leadership and, what my organisation does in particular is, so we set the rules for the energy markets in Australia. We do that through a process that involves a lot of consultation with stakeholders, and we take a lot of different points of view on board in deciding what we think the best way forward is. And it really reflects how I operate in any case, which is one thing I love is a good idea. So I think sometimes people get bound up in thinking that the role of a leader is to always be right and to come up with the best idea yourself. But I actually think the role of a leader is to find the best idea and then be able to pursue that. And so that ability to listen and to really empower others. So it works for me both with the way our organisation works with stakeholders, but then how I work myself with people within our organisation and wanting to see them do their best and doing everything I can to support and achieve that, I think then sort of means that we're all kind of achieving better outcomes. So that's how I think about what I feel is really important as a leader, and how I use my own strengths to take a leadership role. And when I think about my who's inspired me, I always go back to my own mother. So my mother was an accountant in the 1960s here in Australia, and that was very unusual. She was one of very, very few people in her females studying accounting at that time. And when you meet her, you wouldn't think trailblazer. She's also just a sort of very quiet, unassuming woman, and she just did her job because she loved it. So she was a partner of a small suburban accounting firm by the time I was 5 years old. I had 2 younger siblings as well. And she always just juggled what she enjoyed about her job, what she enjoyed about helping her clients with, her at the time was, she was still pursuing her traditional role as well. So I learned a lot from her about the importance of staying true to yourself and the value of doing something that you really love, but also the fact that, well, you can also, take your own path and do something that might be unusual without having to be hugely different from who you might otherwise be. So she was my first role model. And then across my career, I've had many different mentors and role models and sponsors. I would probably leap all the way to the end of my career and not there yet. This latter part of my career and making the shift from being a law firm partner into the energy regulatory role. And there was 2 women in particular. One, a woman by the name of Chloe Munro, who had a sort of stellar career through the public service here in Australia, particularly focused in the energy sector. And I was introduced to her at one point, and she was one of those people who I reached out to and said, "Oh, would you mind if I have a conversation with you from time to time?" Who was very warm and welcoming. And not only would she be prepared to sit down with me when I was, grappling with an issue that I was trying to nut through or prepare for an interview, for example, she would be putting me forward for roles in the sector and saying, "I think you should try out for this role," and making sure that I was under consideration for things. So that in some ways she was very kind of like important in me being able to make that step through helping me look at different roles and making sure that, the people who were considering candidates, that I was on their radar. And then once I actually moved into this role, I was fortunate to work with another very senior public servant by the name of Kerry Schott, who at that stage was leading what we call the Energy Security Board, which is a combination of my organisation together with my colleagues at the Australian Energy Regulator and the Australian Energy Market Operator. And she's continued to she retired. I actually ended up taking her role as the chair of that organisation, in addition to being the chair of the Australian Energy Market Commission. But again, I was able to observe how she operated in practice, and she's also been very generous with her time since then to catch up and be able to talk through issues that I'm grappling with and just get feedback on how she thinks particular issues might play out, or where she thinks there's important things to be taken into account. So, as I said, many others along the way, but there's a couple that have really stood out for me.
Great, Anna. Thank you very much for our conversation. It was extremely inspiring. Thanks for contributing with so much input to our discussion. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you, Ilaria. It's been really great talking to you. I've enjoyed it very much.